Good day. My name is Terry Difazio, and you're watching Dial It Up on NEK-TV. This is the inaugural edition of Dial It Up, and today with me is newspaper reporter from the Newport Daily Express, Christopher Roy. Good to have you on the show, Chris.
Thanks for having me, Terry.
First I wanted to ask you was, what got you interested in being a newspaper reporter?
Well, we go back quite a few years, actually.
Yes, we're old. We're pretty old. Well, I am anyways. I'm a lot older than Chris.
Right?
Probably by 20 years.
But when I was about 9 or 10, my father bought me a CB radio set and a scanner.
Oh, I remember those.
Yeah, a long time ago. Not too many people do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that eventually led me to obtain my amateur radio license.
Mm-hmm.
And I was able to communicate around the world. And I decided to write an editorial about amateur radio for the Newport Daily Express.
Oh.
And that is kind of how I got started. They were looking for reporters at the time, and Terry Albee picked me up as a freelancer.
Oh, okay. And so you said you started this at around age 9?
No.
But I mean, that's when your interest started.
Yes, that's when my interest started.
Okay, so when did the other part kick in?
Probably 2 or 3 months right out of high school, so when I was about 18.
Oh, okay. Now, when you were in high school, did you get any specific training for this, or any specific classes you liked?
I did not. In fact, I had taken a marketing class with Joe Batista, who was the Decker advisor at the time.
Oh, okay, I know Joe.
And I was very interested in opening my own business, but this kind of put me on a different path.
Oh, okay. So, high school didn't really give you what you needed to know?
Not for this occupation, not really, except for English and typical skills you would learn in high school.
Okay. Now, English should be very, very important, especially if you heard the way some people speak English. Knowing proper English is very important, and I can't stress it enough. So, did you go to college, or did you go to a trade school, or where did you go after high school to get these specific skill sets?
A lot of it was on-the-job training.
Oh, okay.
Terry Albee was a great mentor to me, and he was the editor at the Newport Daily for years.
Mm-hmm.
And Ken Stokes, who was a reporter at the newspaper, also mentored me to a great extent, as well as other past editors at the paper, like Sue Davis.
Oh, okay. Yes, I know Sue. I don't know this other individual. When was he there? Terry Albee?
He was there. He left the newspaper in the late 1990s.
Okay.
He was looking for a different focus, so he went over to the Caledonian Record and ran the Newport Bureau.
Okay. Now, are there any sort of specific skills that you need to know in order to be a newspaper reporter? Obviously, you have to know, the right way the correct way to write, because as you know, you can't write the way you speak.
Right.
If you write it down, you'll say, gee, I said it, but it looks horrible when I've written it. So any specific skill sets that you had to, really hone in on?
Oh, certainly on my English skills.
Mm-hmm.
And being able to question people, being able to think quickly.
Oh, yes, definitely.
Being able to focus.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly in the small newspapers, you have to be able to have photography skills, and Photoshop skills and layout skills. In years ago, we used a lot of Cork. Now we're using a different program called InDesign, and those are the layout programs, because we don't do a lot of paste up anymore. We don't do any paste up. Everything is done on the computer.
Right. Yeah, we use InDesign here, and that's a heck of a program. So you're using InDesign now?
We are using InDesign.
And how long have you had that program?
That is a relatively new system for us, probably within the past 6 months. And up until then, we were using Cork.
Do you like InDesign?
I do like InDesign. There's a lot of things that you can do with it. But you have to keep up your skills, or you're going to forget the keystrokes, because it's a totally different program than Cork. You can do a lot more with it. Yeah.
I noticed that when we got here. I was used to using Microsoft Publisher, and when you go over to InDesign, you've got everything's put in different places. And wouldn't it be nice if things were standardized?
It would be nice. Yeah. Absolutely. But there is really no standard.
No, there isn't.
InDesign, from everything that I understand, is the top program now. That's what most publishing companies are using.
Yeah, there's usually an industry standard. For example, for sound recording, it's Pro Tools, and I would imagine that InDesign is for newspaper?
InDesign and Photoshop.
Oh, okay. All right.
Photoshop is a very skillful program. There's a lot you can do with it. Unfortunately, that we don't do everything that the program can do, and just because of the nature of the beast.
Yeah, and of course, probably it's difficult to get training other than, say, webinars.
I would say so. The Career Center offers some basic Photoshop classes, and you can go to different weekend training courses, etc. But I don't know where one would go around here to totally learn the program of either InDesign or Photoshop, because it can do a lot more than what newspapers do with it.
Oh, is that right?
Oh,
yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, I've seen some of it, and it is rather extensive, isn't it?
I can take a picture of you, and the right person could crop you out and make it look like you're sitting in a war zone someplace.
Yeah. It's kind of like a green screen on crack.
Exactly.
For those of you who don't know it by now, I was a drug and alcohol counselor, so you're probably going to hear a lot of drug references, because that was the type of humor we had. But at any rate, it's interesting how you can do some of those things. And it's also, I would imagine, it can be kind of dangerous. You can Photoshop things that you're not supposed to, and you can sort of skew stories in a certain way. I mean, I've seen even our president photoshopped in such a way that made him look very, very bad, and I can see the downside of that too.
Yeah, certainly that would be, at least in my industry, very unethical. And that is things you need to stay away from.
Oh, yes.
And social media, like Facebook, sometimes has pictures of important people doing foolish things, but they're not really doing the foolish things. Somebody had a little bit of time on his or her hands and decided to make the picture look like something that's not.
Yeah, I think I've seen a few of those.
Yeah.
And usually, not on social media, but like in a newspaper or a magazine, they're supposed to put some sort of a disclaimer that this is a parody or whatever. I know that there was a satire that came out a couple of weeks ago in the Huffington Post, and I actually thought it was true until I really read it closely, and it was about Ben Carson, but it was a satire. It wasn't real. But at any rate, so have you had any recent trainings, anything new on the horizon that's come up that you've really had to hone in on that you hadn't had before?
Oh, you're always updating your skills. I'm taking a Photoshop class now at the Career Center to kind of refresh my skills, and there's always something new coming out, something new and interesting to learn, and I really have to change with the times, because things are changing. A lot of people want their news instantly.
Yeah.
You can get your news instantly on the phone. A plane crash that happens in California, at 10:30, it's already online and people are getting messages about it at 10:40.
Mm-hmm.
You know, gone are the days where you have to wait till the next day to get your news.
Yeah, I know, and there's a good side to that, and there's also a downside to that. And as you probably have realized too, things are accelerating, especially technology is accelerating at an incredible rate, isn't it?
It is, absolutely. And that's another comment. Really, anybody with a cell phone and internet connection in today's world can be a reporter.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to take what comes across social media with a grain of salt,
Mm-hmm.
because it can be very dangerous. They can put information. There's a big fire down in on Main Street in Newport, where they're just doing training.
Yeah.
So you have to be very careful on where you read your news and who's making the post.
In other words, what Chris is trying to tell you, and I agree with this 100%, you always check your source.
Always check your source.
Always check your source. I know that certain individuals send me emails about things, and when I go to PolitiFact check, it turns out that it's totally ridiculous.
Right.
But early on, did you have any specific people that influenced you, or people you looked up to, or somebody you might have admired that said, geez, I'd like to do something just like that guy or that girl or whatever?
Yep, sure. Again, I think Terry Albee,
Mm-hmm.
Ken Stokes, in more recent years, Mike Donahue, who just retired from the Burlington Free Press. And those are all great reporters, or were great reporters in a couple of cases, because Ken and Terry are deceased.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
But they were very old school, especially Terry Albee was the Perry White of the Newport Daily.
Okay. Yes, Perry White. I remember him. For those of you who don't know who that is, that's Superman's boss, right?
The editor at the Daily Planet.
The Daily Planet, yes. I remember that show when it came on. You know what happened to Superman, didn't you?
What's that?
After they canceled the show, George Reeve, was it?
Yeah.
He committed suicide.
Yeah, I knew. Oh, yeah, I knew. I did know that.
Yeah. Wasn't so super. I guess the bullet was a little stronger. Are there any interviews that you've done that are extremely memorable? Something you could say, boy, that was a lot of fun.
I like interviewing politicians.
Mm-hmm.
The people like Bernie Sanders, Patrick Leahy,
Mm-hmm.
Jim Jeffords,
Mhm.
Peter Welch, Jim Douglas.
Mm-hmm.
Jim Douglas was a great interviewer.
Oh, okay.
And if he saw you, that he would remember your name always. If I interviewed him once, 6 years later, he would still remember who I am.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and what made him such an interesting or good interview? Was it just it just flowed better, or he had certain information that seemed to be better?
It flowed well.
Mm-hmm.
He's a very smart man, and I think he's very well liked in Vermont, and he was governor for a long time.
So you got to interview Bernie Sanders?
Yes, many times.
Many times, okay. When was the last one?
Probably a few years ago, before he decided to run for president. I haven't spoken to him since.
Okay.
I just haven't had the opportunity.
Yeah, and with his schedule, probably nobody up here will, but we've made the offer to have him come in, and anybody else that wants to come in for that matter.
Sure.
And I think probably in your case, too, you guys give equal time to anybody.
Yep, absolutely.
Anybody that asks for time or asks for print, you give it to them.
Absolutely.
Were there any interviews that you were given that you really dreaded, other than this one?
I'm not sure that I really dreaded them.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's probably being properly prepared for the interview.
Mm-hmm.
Because everybody has a story to tell.
Right.
And even if not, it's up to me to report to the readers what I feel that they want to know. Why is this person running for this particular office?
Right.
And what do the readers want to know? It's not what I want to know, it's what the public wants to know.
But it also, you'll have to admit, well, you don't have to, but isn't it easier when you're interested in the person or the subject?
Oh, absolutely. But everybody's interesting, and everybody has a story.
Yeah, I agree. And we've had quite a few people in here, and some are extremely interesting, and Some aren't, but we give them all at the same time if they need time or whatever. Is there anybody, or there probably are several people you wish you could interview again?
Oh, absolutely. I would like to interview Bernie Sanders now, and try to get the local angle, and try to find out why people like him so much. Aside from the obvious.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, a lot of people don't like him for the obvious reason too,
right.
But it's really interesting. I mean, I'd like to know how you feel about it, but I thought it was very interesting and very savvy of him to, instead of just running as an independent, he decided, I'll run as a Democrat, because he knew that if he ran as an independent, he'd split the Democratic vote and the Republicans would automatically win. But what is your take on him? I mean, what do you think? Why now? I mean, he's 74. If he wins 2 terms, he'll be 82 when he leaves. He'll be as old as Leahy, I think, won't he?
I'm not quite sure. That's a question I can't answer. I'm sorry. But I think he probably feels that he can do well for the country.
Mm-hmm.
And so far as running as a Democrat instead of an independent,
mm-hmm.
I think it's probably hard for a third party to win the highest office in the country, in some respects, the highest offering in the world.
Yeah. Oh, I agree. And yes, and like I said, I thought it was pretty savvy of him to try that, because every time somebody's run as a third party, they probably would have failed, except maybe Perot, who kept bailing and then re-entering and bailing and
right.
re-entering, and he kind of shot himself in the foot there. But if you were to give any advice to somebody who wants to get into the business, what would you give them? What would you tell them that they needed to do?
Journalists, as an industry, unless you're working for a national company like ABC, CBS,
mm-hmm.
etc., will not get rich in this industry. It's just the nature of the beast. It always has been. So somebody has to look, can I really support myself and my family and live the lifestyle that I desire on this occupation? If you want to drive around in $80,000 vehicles and have airplanes and $1 million home, it's not going to work. But if you want to live a happy and modest life, you can have a very fulfilling job.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very happy at where I am. And I probably would not want to work at a big newspaper company. The Newport Daily Express is going to survive for a long time, even though there's a lot of newspapers who are starting to cut costs, and you see things starting to cut off a little bit. Local newspapers is still where people want to get the local news, and there's still something about getting up in the morning and picking up the local paper and seeing what happened the previous day. You have to wait for it, but it's there.
Yeah, and probably bring up a good point here. For example, if you're reading the New York Times, for example, you can probably get all of that information right online.
You can get the information online. A lot of papers make you pay for that information.
Mm-hmm.
And the New York Times won't cover your child winning last night's basketball game.
Right.
Up here at North Country.
Yeah. The local paper will, like yourself, right?
Exactly. And we can put a dozen pictures of last night's basketball game, or the Halloween parade, or the Santa festival. I mean, people in New York City don't care that little Johnny is sitting on Santa Claus's lap here in Newport, Vermont.
Right.
But that's the type of news a community newspaper can publish.
Now, I would imagine that if you worked for the Boston Globe or the New York Times or the LA Times or whatever it is, I would imagine the pay would be a lot higher, wouldn't it?
The pay would be a lot higher, but it would be a lot more stressful and a lot more fast-paced.
Oh, yes, definitely. Yeah, you'd definitely have to hustle, wouldn't you?
You would have to hustle, and again, it's more stressful and a lot more stressful situations. I don't think I would want to live in Los Angeles.
My son lives there, and he doesn't like living there either.
Right. There's a lot of crime, and you have to keep on top of it every minute of every day.
Yeah, I would imagine that even here at the Newport Daily, I would imagine you still got to hustle, because when something happens, you've got to be there to get the story, correct?
Oh, absolutely.
And now, where do you get your sources from? Where do your main sources come from?
It depends on what it is. A lot of times, a scanner, messages on Facebook. I was kind of talking bad about social media a few minutes ago, but somebody might say, there's a fire in North Troy, a lot of smoke. What's going on? Then I would start making calls, because I can't sit by the scanner 24 hours a day. But most of the time I have my cell phone close to me, so I kind of keep tabs on what's going on that way. Or just tips. People call me up on the phone and say, hey, you want to look into this? Or if I go to like a city council meeting, something might grab my interest enough to follow up on whatever the topic is. If it's the city of Newport needs a new fire truck, I might call the fire chief the next day and, why do you need a new fire truck? What's wrong with it? How long have you had it? How are you going to get there?
All right. Yeah, and does that happen very often?
It happens more often than not. A lot of times that means, again, you pick up something that you want to follow up on in the next couple of days beyond what was said at the meeting.
Yes, and Chris and I have worked some of these things together, as a matter of fact.
Yes.
For example, like Breakfast with the Legislators. I mean, it's just so exciting.
Well, people are interested in that, and you might pick up on something.
Yes. I personally, I don't know how you feel about this, I personally feel that when they have all of them in one room and they give them specific times and they can't just run off on these big long tangents and things, I find that to be a little better, don't you?
I do find that as a good way to get information, and also for me to gain knowledge. We talked a few minutes ago about education. I was at one of those breakfasts, and they were talking about current news, and I wasn't really familiar with that program, so I had to do a lot of research to try to figure out what was going on with that, because I had no idea. And I'm not going to say I'm an expert on it, but I know enough to get me in trouble, I guess.
Yes, I know how that works. And even at these breakfasts, Chris and I, for a long time, I refused to get up and ask questions, but Chris here, even though he's supposed to be a reporter, he's gotten up and he's asked the legislators questions, and I've done it a couple of times myself, and I think I'm going to have to bite my tongue this next time, because I've got some things that have really irked me, but that's another story. But I did want to ask you about this. I've noticed that not with print newspapers so much, but more with broadcast journalism. And I won't even mention specifics, but say, for example, the big networks, and there's about 5 or 6 big networks, it almost seems to be like they're in the entertainment business rather than reporting the news.
Right.
How do you feel? Is that your take on it, or how do you feel about that?
I think it depends on the time slot. I think a lot of the morning programs aimed at entertainment after they do the first 10 or 15 minutes of news. But again, what demographics are home during that time? Probably a lot of homebound people, or people, young mothers with children who have to stay home to take care of the child, because they'll interview some celebrity. I really could care less what Justin Bieber is doing. But he might appear on some morning program.
Yeah, all you have to do is tune into Trainwrecks, and you've got that one. And I agree with you. It's too bad, but it seems like the major networks, and this is an advantage for yourself. You don't work for a big newspaper or a big news conglomerate. These guys are catering to ratings. Correct?
That's correct, but our paper is owned by a company in Chicago called Horizon.
Okay.
Or Horizon Publications. And the company owns like 80 some odd newspapers in the U.S. and Canada.
Oh, okay.
It's still a large paper or a large company. But again, we try to cover the local news as much as we can. And that is what corporate likes, is to see local news.
Do any of your articles ever get published elsewhere?
They have.
Oh, tell me where, for example.
Well, a few times I had the wire services pick up my stories and pictures. When they saw when they saw the Miss Newport Diner.
Oh, okay, yeah.
AP picked that up, and it ended up in the papers where the owner who bought the diner lives.
So, some of your stories have gone national.
Some of my stories have gone national, yeah.
How about international?
No, not that I know of.
Well, Canada's international, right?
This is true.
Yeah, and so the circulation of the parent company that owns you, you said how many outlets do they have?
They have something like 80 some odd newspapers in between U.S. and Canada.
Oh, wow. Well, that is quite a bit, isn't it?
Yes.
So, any final words? If somebody out there is interested in getting into this and really wants to make a career out of this, is there anything you'd like to tell them? Because in my opinion, I think this is still very important.
It is very important, but people have to be ready for change. Again, local newspapers are great. We're still getting a lot of information, but we have to utilize technology that's available to us. Because really, my generation, I think, is probably the last newspaper generation.
You're probably right.
I think a lot of teenagers and the individuals in their 20s really want their news electronically. Mm-hmm. They don't want to have to wait.
Yeah. And as a matter, and Chris brings up a very good point. And also, you're going to be seeing a very big change in the way television is set out. Your cable providers and your satellite providers are going to have to change, because if they don't, that's going to go by the wayside very, very soon. In my opinion, I'm looking at the internet as something that's going to gobble up a lot of things.
Oh, absolutely. Things are changing, and they're changing fast.
Well, I think it has to do probably with I think it's the process of entropy. That which does not change will die. So if you have something and it stays the same throughout years and years and years, it will eventually die because it hasn't adapted or evolved. Even as long, how long have you been working at the Newport Daily?
Since 1991.
Okay, so you've been there
just a few years.
What have we got here? 91? Oh, wow.
Yeah,
you got 24 years.
24 years, yeah.
Okay, so in 24 years, and the 90s weren't that long ago, folks. I mean, it did give us grunge.
Right, and again, when I first started, everything was done on film.
Right.
And we had to develop the film, and that was a process in itself. Now I can shoot with my digital camera, and I can upload the picture immediately to our website. I can send it to my editor, or do a number of things with it. Mm-hmm. And with my camera now, I can shoot maybe 1,000 pictures on one memory card. Back when I first started, I had one roll of film that had maybe 24 shots if I was lucky.
Yeah, and you were really stuck with what you had.
You were really stuck with what you had, and you didn't know if the image you had would be a good image.
Yeah, and you'd also be at the mercy of who was developing it too. And I remember how those days. So.
Oh, absolutely, and it's also good to be cross-trained at local papers. Mm-hmm. Ken Wells has taught me, who's the publisher, has taught me some about the marketing aspect, even mm-hmm. maybe not necessarily directly, but through conversation with him and hearing his conversations with the advertising staff. And I'm also cross-trained to do layout, edit pictures. You have to be versatile in this business. You can't just do one thing like news reporting or photography mm-hmm. like you could 20 years ago. You have to be able to you have to have a huge skill set.
Yeah, I would imagine so. Chris, our time is up, and I want to thank you for coming on the inaugural episode of Dial It Up. This is Terry Difazio, and I want to thank you all for watching, and we'll see you on the flip side. Have a good day.
Thanks for having me.